Welcome back to the target stream for Mint Press News. I'm your host, Robert and Lakesh. As always, thank you to everyone for joining us for today's episode. Iran takes out more vessels as Trump's pledge of opening the Strait of Hormuz turns out to again be a lie. Meanwhile, Yemen's Ansarallah has annihilated Saudi proxy positions as Hezbollah detonated Israeli occupying soldiers in southern Lebanon. Meanwhile, Riyadh braces for something even bigger. That's a potential Iraqi attack, which it says, according to its intelligence sources, may come in coordination with Yemen's Ansarallah. But before we begin, the target stream is 100% viewer funded. In the last 2 years, we were financially targeted and banned by PayPal and had our fundraisers taken down by Indiegogo and GoFundMe. So they even withheld our funds. We are looking for 300 new members to keep this news show alive. You can join us at Mint Press on Patreon and right here on YouTube and join our membership program here. So a lot to get into. Just before this stream started, it appears as if Yemen's Ansarallah have launched an offensive to seize Ma'arib, which is a stronghold for the Saudi-backed opposition forces. Of course, it launched a large attack, which we're going to go into a little bit deeper as well earlier today. So some major developments there. We're going to cover all of this and look at what that could mean. But first, Trump claimed at the start of the week that he had halted his strikes on Iran and that a deal was imminent, that the Strait of Hormuz was going to close within a few days. And of course, a few days came and went and nothing happened as usual, because this is the cycle of the Trump administration. Threatens a major offensive against Iran, what he says is the largest strike package since World War II. And then suddenly he backs out on it and he's talking about a deal. And of course, there's been a lot of speculation about Iran, whether it's negotiating or not. We have the, at this point, infamous Barak Ravid for Axios News reporting, according to his sources, that there are negotiations ongoing and that a deal could have been announced sometime yesterday. And of course, this as well was disinformation as usual. We've come to accept that Axios just reports whatever the Israelis tell it to report. That at least it looks like this. They get it wrong so many times, and they don't seem to even bother, let's say, trying to check with other sources before putting things out because it's blatant disinformation. Now, there are ongoing discussions, and it looks like they are in advanced stages between Oman and Iran. These talks are separate from the United States, and these talks are about a post-war management of the Strait of Hormuz. These are not a negotiation to come back to the Memorandum of Understanding as it's been presented. And evidently, as the time goes on, it's been revealed that, yes, that is in fact the case. Iran has been negotiating with their neighbor, but it appears as if the allocation of who's getting what percentage of fees in this exchange is going to create some problems with Washington. So although they say it's in advanced stages, Washington will intervene. And this will mean that Oman, even if it wants to abide by an agreement that it strikes with Iran, may be pressured to assume a different position. And that being said, there's another controversy that's been ongoing. And of course, the Trump administration has lashed out denying it, saying that they're going to put the journalists who are, or the leakers in jail. But the Washington Post came out with this exclusive earlier today that Trump and Hegseth clashed at Camp David over Iran's missile depletion concerns. Now, according to the sources that are covering this, Trump did understand that there was a depletion of the United States' precision missiles, both offensive and defensive, by the way, around 80% of their strategic munitions. And that was a story that hit the headlines. We saw CNN covered this. 80% of interceptors for a key missile defense system, this is THAAD system, have been depleted. They've either been used by the United States in this Iran war, or they have been destroyed. Of course, this doesn't go, it doesn't specify how much of this arsenal has been destroyed versus how much has been fired. But regardless, we know that Iran has been targeting radar systems in the region. It's continued to strike at a series of different targets. There has been ongoing cross-border special forces operations that the Iranian army has announced are taking place against Kurdish opposition groups in northern Iraq. And what's interesting about that is now the Iranian military are able to do these operations. There doesn't seem to be any repercussions for it. And they are hammering down on the possible ground force that would be used by the United States and Israel to invade their territory. They've been pushing, Trump since the start of the war has been pushing for the Kurdish forces to work as their proxy on the ground against Iran, and that evidently failed. And they've been repeatedly targeting these sites, weapons depots, radars, of course, as well, U.S. targets, which has forced a withdrawal of U.S. forces from Erbil in Iraq. And that is a massive concern for the Trump administration, because that is another card that is being taken away from them, that they are not going to have. Now, Trump previously threatened that they would take out Iranian civilian infrastructure for every vessel that was struck in the Strait of Hormuz. And now, of course, Iran is striking these vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, and there is no response that is coming. Here is satellite imagery, which depicts a fire in the region as a result of Iran's strike on a vessel, which the United States has been consistently coordinating with these vessels to try and transit the Strait of Hormuz closer to Emirati territory and then Oman. But Iran keeps striking them. The IRGC Navy is firing at these vessels, hitting them directly. The United States is doing absolutely nothing about it. And just before this stream, we managed to pull up a few different ships that had halted operations, that had not moved in some time after Iran fired missiles at towards these targets in the Strait of Hormuz. There's one here, and there's another here that just completely stopped. They appear not to be moving anymore. And Iran, of course, did fire. Apparently, there were explosions and missiles that were tracked being fired over Qashem Island. And there was initially some concern that the United States had started a new bombing campaign, but it turned out that, in fact, it was Iran firing munitions at these vessels, which were attempting to break the blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. And it's a rather stupid thing to do. And I don't understand for the life of me how they are managing to keep these ships going. They just keep attempting and keep getting struck by ballistic missiles and drones and cruise missiles. And it's not looking good for them at all. They have failed month after month. They continue to try and push, and Iran hits these ships with ease. And it doesn't matter how much the United States strikes southern Iran, it does absolutely nothing. And we've been saying that here on this show, that it doesn't matter how much the US strike southern Iran in these military positions, Iran is going to continue to control the Strait of Hormuz. Like we saw from Yemen's Ansarallah, the United States bombed them for a month and a half, wasted billions of dollars, brought in its strategic bombers. Yemen does not have these sorts of air defense systems that Iran possesses, and it did absolutely nothing. They weren't able to break the blockade that Yemen at the time was imposing on the Israelis. Something else that has continued to happen is there's occasionally been strikes that are carried out, drone strikes on targets, which was spotted hit in Kuwait. So the Iranians have continued to carry out these operations, and the United States so far has not done anything in retaliation. They continue to take these hits to their proxies, and the situation is escalating day after day. Of course, Trump is, threatening again that he is going to launch some sort of an offensive if an understanding has not been reached. But now time is running out. Time is running out, quite frankly, for the Trump administration, because those strategic petroleum reserves they're having to dip deeper into them. They're already at the level they were in the early 1980s. That's how far they've been drained. And they can keep propping up the price of the Brent crude futures, but that is just not reality. So they can continue doing that and manipulating the price of oil. But it is only going to be partially successful for a limited amount of time before the reality sets in, because there is, a physical reality. And once those reserves dwindle, then we're going to see a different scenario entirely. And of course, Saudi Arabia, in the month of July, we just got news that its exports to the United States of oil dropped to zero for the first time in 40 years. So that's of course, a big development. The other major development has been that Ansarallah, the Yemeni government based in Sana'a, which, of course, all the corporate media, every media outlet you're going to see, unfortunately, calls the Houthis, even though that's not their name. They insist upon calling them the Houthis, which is, of course, a family name, not the name of the party. They refused to give them their legitimacy, of course, but they might be forced to give Yemen's Ansarallah its legitimacy if things do play out in the favor of the Yemeni armed forces. So in this report, they say that dozens of Saudi-backed Yemeni government forces, and these are just Saudi proxy forces, were killed in a series of strikes. So the strikes were launched towards areas such as Marib and also Hadramaut, which is in the east of the country. I'll just pull up on a map here just to locate. So this is the Hadramaut provincial area. And then we have Marib down here. Marib this is the city, is renowned as a stronghold. So the Saudi proxy forces have bases. And according to what Ansarallah released in their press release on the issue, because this was a massive strike and it wasn't dozens killed, they've now admitted, earlier on there were reports that 60 of these Saudi proxy forces were killed on the strikes on their bases. They've finally admitted 58, and that there is around 100 others wounded. I don't know if they've admitted the wounded amount, but that was according to reports that we heard earlier. And we do have some videos that have emerged of some of these strikes that have occurred. So this obviously here is from a distance, but these are the videos that emerged. Massive preemptive strikes that were carried out. Yemen's Ansarallah reported that there were preparations being made to attack their forces, to try and, of course, overthrow the government, to do regime change on behalf of Saudi Arabia, backed by the United States, backed by the British, backed by backed by Israel in Yemen. So they wanted to try and launch this offensive. That's, of course, what is being said by the authorities in Sana'a. So here, more footage we have that's filmed by bystanders where they struck these military positions. And we had reports that because the intensity of the strikes when they hit and how it was a massive surprise to these forces, they ended up fleeing these bases and just evacuating them completely because they had no idea how many drones, how many missiles were going to hit. We also have image here that was taken from one of those positions that was struck. Devastating attacks absolutely devastating attacks that were launched. Just a few days prior, there were a number of other developments, because Yemen is perhaps the where the escalation is occurring, the biggest escalation is occurring at the moment. And this is significant for a variety of reasons, which we'll get into. But there are also reports of missiles being fired from Yemen towards the UAE. And according to satellite imagery, there were factories that were struck in near Dubai. There were massive explosions reported. People were taking images, and we didn't get any confirmation on precisely what happened there, although there were reports that those missiles were fired from Yemen. Of course, Yemen also went after Saudi targets, again, for violations of Yemen's airspace. That's all happened within the past few days. And we've seen that Yemen has struck a number of tankers attempting to violate their blockade on Saudi Arabia, because, of course, Ansarallah is imposing this blockade on Saudi in the Red Sea and refusing to allow them, or any ship, any vessel that is affiliated with Saudi Arabia, to transit the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. And we've seen a series of different missile attacks on these ships, both Saudi tankers, and then here we have satellite imagery. This is also off the coast of Aden in the south of Yemen. This was a Greek-owned vessel that was also struck and spotted on fire. So enormous developments there. Also, if Yemen decides, and it appears that right now what we've heard are the initial reports of missiles and drones being fired towards the positions of the Yemeni forces that are aligned with Saudi Arabia. And of course, there are as well foreigners that Saudi Arabia has historically employed as well in order to fight its battles for it. But we're hearing that there could be an offensive to capture Marib in Yemen. Now, there was an attempt back in 2021 where there were these major battles that took place inside of Yemen to seize this territory and to take it back, as it is a massive stronghold for the Saudi proxy forces in the country, and capturing it would severely weaken them, of course, and cut off a supply line or a number of supply lines for them. So when that occurred, the Yemeni armed forces aligned with Ansarallah took big hits back in 2021. There were reports of tens of thousands of their fighters being killed. Now, we don't know the precise numbers, but we do know that this was a very deadly and costly offensive that they committed themselves to. And part of the reason why it was so deadly for them is that Saudi Arabia was so heavily involved using its air force. What we saw towards the tail end of 2021 and early 2022, when there was eventually a ceasefire that was brokered by the United Nations. It was supposed to be temporary, and then it just sort of extended. After that, they just kept extending it, and neither side wanted to fully engage. But what happened is that Ansarallah seemed to have acquired more precise munitions and more powerful munitions, more advanced precision weapons. Its drone arsenal and its ballistic missile and cruise missile arsenal expanded greatly. And because of this, they were able to hit these strategic targets in Saudi Arabia and in the United Arab Emirates. And even they struck the United Arab Emirates when there was an official visit by the Israeli president, Isaac Herzog, who went over to Dubai, I think it was. I don't think Abu Dhabi. He visited just Dubai at the time. And when that happened, this sort of signaled to the Emiratis and to the Saudis that they should freeze the conflict, or else there was going to be a lot of repercussions. Yemen has been very strong with Saudi Arabia in the past weeks. It has been hitting oil and gas sites at any chance it gets, going after air bases. but it has been trying to make the Saudis hurt, make them bleed. And the reason why it is being so ruthless with its strikes, even Saudi will fly drones over their airspace. They will shoot down that drone or fire at the drone, and then they will return fire by hitting oil and gas facilities. The reason why is because they want to deter Saudi Arabia from being very heavily involved if they do any other offensive action. So if this time the Yemeni armed forces are going to advance, they might be a lot more successful. And we're already hearing reports that the Saudi proxy forces, some of them are deserting from their positions. They're running away. They're retreating. So obviously, all of this will get the developments as they pour in. This is very new news. It is a major offensive if it is in fact happening. And we do know that for some time now, the Yemeni armed forces have been mobilizing, and they have been signaling that they are going to fight in order to liberate their territory, that they want to end the blockade on their country, which has cost the lives of the lion's share of over 400,000 people that have died in Yemen since 2015, when the Saudi-led coalition, but really, they were pushed into this by the Obama administration that gave them the green light, the Saudis and their coalition. Because the whole point of this here is that they want Yemen fractured and they want Yemen weak. And even if Ansarallah is still there, they don't want them to, even if it was a power sharing agreement, and they allowed other parties, perhaps that are operating in other groups, they reached some sort of an agreement to unite the country. They do not want this at any cost, the United States, and certainly not the Israelis, because as we've seen, Ansarullah's government is the only one that has ordered attacks on Israel in defense of Gaza out of every single Arab government. No other Arab government in the entire region dared fire at Israel in defense of Gaza. No country in the region did so. The only argument you have for another country being involved is, of course, Iran. But Iran has fired defensively. It didn't go on the offensive against the Israelis in defense of Gaza like Yemen did. And so they will, at any cost, try to stop this from happening. Because if you have Yemen will be the only country, if it is independent, if it is united, if it has access to its resources. And of course, it has control here over Bab el-Mandeb, which is another strategic waterway. If Yemen is united and Yemen is independent, then you have now a military power to be reckoned with that will directly challenge Israel, directly challenge the United States, and directly put in line all of these Persian Gulf Arab states, kingdoms that are fully on the side of the United States, that are allied with the US. This is a massive threat to, of course, the United States and the Israelis and their Western allies. And that's why the United States invested so much in terms of the weaponry. They provided logistical support, right? Training, everything you could imagine, and also committed their own airstrikes in Yemen, and then eventually got directly involved in defense of the Israelis against Yemen's Ansarallah. They have done all of this. They have committed their resources to this and backed Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and others. There was a coalition of all these Arab countries that joined in to try and overthrow Ansarullah's administration in Sana'a. And ultimately they failed, evidently. But they would be the only Arab nation that would have really full independence. And that's what they're scared of. They'll give you all these ridiculous arguments about, human rights violations and, they're not a Western-style democracy. And to that, you just have to ask the question, is Saudi Arabia a Western-style democracy? Is the United Arab Emirates, even Oman, is it a Western-style democracy? Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, are they Western-style democracies? Jordan, Egypt, Iraq, Syria? Western style democracies? No, of course they're not. So that's not the reason why they have a problem with them. And everyone, by the way, everyone is going to lie to you about Yemen. Because nobody, simply put, nobody has any interest in telling the truth about Yemen unless suddenly it was able to gain back control of its country and it suddenly would assert itself and its power in the Red Sea and over Bab el-Mandeb. Then some countries would come along and want to collaborate with it and accept its governance. But at this point, they have to call them, the forces there, they have to call them the proxies of Iran. And as I've explained in other episodes before, if you actually track back the movement, right, and which is sort of based around the Houthis, the family. If you look at it in its foundational days, with its old leader, Hussein al-Houthi, he was very critical of Iran and very critical publicly of positions adopted by Ayatollah Khomeini. And this is all on the record. If you want to read about this, you can read about this. Of course, they've allied themselves with Iran because the only one that's willing to back them has been Iran. It's sort of like back in the day, you'll look at the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. It's going to take whoever is going to, send it weapons and to aid it. There are red lines with who it will deal with, but it was, no coincidence if it got some help from the Soviets or it got help from China. It was just obvious, right? And these might be ideologically committed to, different things in different directions, but that doesn't matter. They're going to take that help. And Yemen is no different. Yemen is no different. And like I've made a point in covering multiple times when looking at Yemen, they have control over the largest portion of the Yemeni population. They live under Ansarullah's rule. And they also have, from the start, from the get-go, they had 2/3 of the Yemeni armed forces on their side. And even the former Yemeni president, who was pushed out of power in the revolution back in 2011, ended up trying to side with them for some time. It's another story, perhaps, to cover. But the so-called Yemeni government, the internationally recognized government, and I am repeating myself from other episodes, but it's worth repeating because unfortunately you're not going to get this information shared to you elsewhere. It was created here, right, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, of course, in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. So they're the hotel government, and the so-called president of Yemen is living, again, in Saudi Arabia. And they claim to have had a unity government with formerly the Emirati-backed Sovereign Transitional Council. And the STC got a little bit too big for its boots, the Emiratis anyway, because they were a proxy for the Emiratis. They got a bit too big for their boots. And by the start of the year, they were basically gone. And that was because Saudi Arabia pushed back against the Emiratis and began to beef with the Emiratis. And suddenly the STC, which we were told was part of the internationally recognized government of Yemen, that represents a real, a real movement inside of Yemen and is organic, right, and is legitimate and needs to be taken seriously. The second Saudi Arabia pushes back against the UAE, suddenly the STC disappears and it doesn't exist anymore. And it ceases to exist almost without even a fight. So these are all proxies, actual proxies of Saudi Arabia and of the UAE. And the reason why I can say with absolute certainty that they are proxies is because if Saudi Arabia withdrew their support from them today completely and shut them off, you would see that they would go immediately to do some sort of deal with Ansarallah. They would have no other choice. They would have no choice. But of course, these are puppets, right? And the United States put out a statement mourning some 60 proxy forces, which they say are part of the Yemeni internationally recognized government. Again, the reason why it's regarded as the internationally recognized government is because nobody has any interest in backing Yemen, in backing Ansarallah, an Islamic movement, right, which has taken over the biggest portion of the Yemeni population and governs them. Nobody has an interest in that. They don't have access to their country's resources. All they have are weapons. Now they are starting to assert themselves more. They're getting taken more and more seriously, of course, but no one has an interest in backing them. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates are way more important, even to not just the United States and the West, right? We're talking the rest of the world too. It's the same thing. It's a matter of interests. So they're going to adopt the same line because they don't want to upset Saudi Arabia and UAE. That's why we hear they're called the Houthi rebels and the Iranian proxies, and we hear nothing about them. Nobody wants to know anything deeper about this conflict. They never cover it properly. They never tell you anything about the history of Yemen. They don't want to talk about it, right? And if you say anything in the way of what I am trying to present right now, you're a defender of the Houthis and all of this, and you're obsessing over this group, blah blah blah, and they're terrorists and they're horrible and they did human rights violations and all of that, and it's just nonsense. It's just nonsense. It's just they go to whataboutism and all of this stuff. If it was about human rights and all of that, that we're not recognizing Yemen and their government in Sana'a. And if it was about that, I mean, at least you could call them by their actual party name. At least you could grant them recognition of their real party name instead of calling them like a family name. But they won't. They won't. They don't want to tell you the truth about what is going on in Yemen, and they never have. And there's just no interest in doing it because, again, they don't have anything in the way to present that is going to measure up to what Saudi Arabia can present in terms of trade and the relationship that Saudi can have with others. So they're left alone, and the only ones to back them are regional national liberation movements, resistance organizations, and Iran. That's it. And maybe North Korea. That is literally it. No one else will. And the reason why they do it is because, of course, there is an interest in having another ally there, number one. So they actually have the resistance have an interest in Yemen. But also, it's something that for them, it's part of that regional cause. And it always has been. Yeah, and a lot can be said about Yemen and Yemen's history, because South Yemen was actually the first ever Marxist-Leninist government in the entire Arab world. So, these simplistic arguments about Yemen and its history and what its people are, and, the presentations that you see given on how, they're barbaric because they have daggers and all of this, right? That they carry around are just flatly ridiculous, to be quite frank. And on the topic of that, of course, Saudi Arabia recently has beefed up its salaries to the so-called Yemeni government, because you definitely need to start providing large salaries to your employees at a time when they're under immense pressure. I mean, if you're fighting for a cause and your actual government and you have a real movement that is not backed by a foreign power, why would you need boosts in the salaries, right? And why would you need millions and millions being poured in order to keep you afloat? And the answer is, of course, is because they're not a genuine movement. Because if they were, you're being attacked right now, so you're going to defend yourself, right? This is not about ideology. It's not about what sort of government you favor. At the end of the day, if you're not from Yemen, then it's not your country. But at the end of the day, it just goes to show what the situation is right now. And that being said, things are also escalating on the front with between Hezbollah and Israel, because the Israelis, of course, they have refused to withdraw from southern Lebanon, and then the U.S. proxy government centered in Beirut of Joseph Aoun, the president, and Nawaf Salam, the prime minister, signed an agreement recognizing Israel and also basically allowing Israel to occupy the south of their country and pledging that they would themselves order their own Lebanese armed forces to go after Hezbollah, even if that means a civil war, and that they could not complain even. They could not issue legal complaints. Legal complaints they can't even issue, the Lebanese government, over what Israel has done. And Israel has killed around 10,000 Lebanese since 2023. And here's what's been happening recently, because the Israelis, they've been getting a little bit too excited, and they've been trying to enter new buildings in the south of Lebanon. They've been trying to push forward in certain positions. And we've seen these sort of clashes that pop up over the past few weeks where Hezbollah fighters will engage them and shoot at them and injure a number of soldiers. In another case, or actually two cases, it appeared as if a drone and an IED were detonated and struck Israeli military vehicles, armored personnel carriers, it appears. And in this case, the Israelis have admitted 2 soldiers were killed and 4 were seriously wounded. I think it was 7 in total that were wounded. I've also heard reports from the Israeli media. They were saying that a third had died, but that has not been officially announced by the Israeli military yet. So these are the 2 occupiers that were blown to pieces. So basically, they entered a building in South Lebanon as they've been going through South Lebanon and detonating homes and burning down hectares upon hectares of these ancient olive trees that have been there for over 1,000 years, just destroying the land, you know, going through women's underwear drawers as usual, doing the typical Israeli thing of destroying everything you come into contact. Because when you're an indigenous, you're indigenous to the region, that's what you do. You want to burn down everything. You want to destroy the history. You want to kill everything and destroy all the plants and the vegetation, and you spray chemical munitions right on the land to make it uninhabitable as well, at such concentration that it causes cancer and has effects which could be possibly comparable to the effects that Agent Orange has. Those are definitely things you do if you're indigenous to the region, right? So these 2 soldiers found out. They opened the wrong door, and the IED in the town of Majd al-Uzun detonated and took them out. And so apparently, according to the reports that we had from the settler Telegram channels, they start sharing them around, it blew them to pieces. So their limbs were just flung all over the place. It was a very bloody scene. And of course, the Israelis in retaliation decided that, oh, we're going to start a bombing campaign. They tried to ask for a broader attack, but of course, Iran would step in if they go too far against this. So what they did is they started firing incendiary munitions with the intent of burning down Lebanese villages. So they started firing them on a series of different areas and burning the land surrounding these villages and inside these villages. That's Israel's response, as well as they bombed Sur, and which is a city in southern Lebanon, and they continue to escalate their attacks on civilian infrastructure. Days before that as well, the Israelis, again, getting a little bit emboldened because, you know, Hezbollah has been rather silent. There was another period where this happened, and these IEDs suddenly started detonating Israeli military vehicles just before there was the large, campaign of using the FPV drones against the Israelis on a daily basis. And by the way, these FPV drones are still being operated by Lebanese Hezbollah. They're still using them, but they're doing reconnaissance. And the Israelis have complained a lot about this because they still can't do anything about it. There's just literally nothing they can do. But they started issuing these evacuation notices. And they're still obsessed with claiming an area, the Aliyah Tahir area in southern Lebanon. They still are obsessed with that. And they're forcing people to evacuate their homes, civilians in Lebanon. But of course, the Lebanese, so-called Lebanese government in Beirut has signed on to an agreement where it can't even appeal at the UN. It can't do anything. It can't even make an illegal appeal against the Israelis burning down their farmlands and demolishing their homes. And I think they've destroyed, a report came out, I think it was Channel 12 that did the report, if I'm remembering correctly, the Israeli Channel 12, where they analyzed, used the satellite imagery to analyze southern Lebanon. And they found that at least 14,000 buildings had been destroyed by the Israelis. And this is the same tactic that they were using in the Gaza Strip, where they would just go through and flatten absolutely everything. The whole purpose is they want to ethnically cleanse the south of Lebanon. That is the purpose here. They want to clear out the south so that it will not be inhabited, right? And if they want to build some settlements in the future, they can go ahead and do that. And this is a footage here from the medevac that happened for those 2 soldiers, perhaps 3 soldiers that were evacuated, well, in pieces, those soldiers, but the other ones seriously wounded, 4 others seriously wounded, apparently with their limbs blown off. So that's some footage of those Israelis, short footage here of those Israelis being evacuated by helicopter from South Lebanon. And this is something that will be more frequent. Many people ask, why did Hezbollah stop its FPV drone operations and its anti-tank missile attacks? Well, the reality is that they're in a very difficult situation right now. And there, of course, is a number of threats. The first one being that the Trump administration very openly is trying to push Ahmed al-Shara or Abu Mohammed al-Julani, the president of Syria, to deploy his forces into the Bekaa Valley area to invade. There are Syrian forces that had amassed along the border. They're still there, according to the reports that we have. And Trump is constantly pushing for this to happen, for them to invade Lebanese territory. So Hezbollah had to prepare for that. Also, for the possibility that things could get very ugly inside of Lebanon if the Lebanese army is ordered to open fire on Hezbollah, and that could trigger a disintegration of the Lebanese army and a civil war. And so if that comes about, they have to be prepared for that. Now, it's not guaranteed because Hezbollah has prepared for it that it will happen, but they're not going to take any chances because it will be very bloody if that happens. If these sectarian militias pour across the border into Lebanese territory and they want to try and, cleanse the land of non-Sunnis, which means they'll go after the Druze population inside of Lebanon, the Christians, and there's Alawi there as well. There's a lot of Alawi that were living in Syria and fled across the border into Lebanon. So Syrians that had come as refugees to Lebanese territory. The Syrian forces of the so-called Syrian army, which are just a collection of the armed groups which were in Idlib before, and then they'll have allied tribal militias that will fight on their side. These are just sectarian death squads. I mean, there's videos that recently emerged of them trying to march, and it's not difficult to march in formation. It's not a difficult thing. But these people, they don't have to know how to march. They're all over the place. They're doing different things. They can't stay, on beat to get. It's just embarrassing. There's these videos where they were driving around and in a cyber truck, and it's like, you don't have electricity. How are you going to power this thing? But there's a lot of problems inside of Syria, and they're keeping it under wraps now, but we see occasionally things flare up. Like today, there was a car bomb that went off in a majority Druze and also Christians live there. I think some Sunnis live there as well, in Damascus, that killed at least 2. Some reports suggest that 10 were killed, which appears to be a sectarian terrorist attack. And there are these sorts of terrorist attacks that occur with bombs, but also frequent shootings, lots of armed robberies, people just carrying out extrajudicial executions all the time. These sort of things happen. And it's just an absolute shit show. That's the predicament in Syria. And so if this escalates, I've said this a number of times, things could actually go wrong for the United States and Israel and Syria, because a lot of different things could happen. If some of those groups in Syria that are even aligned with the now government forces that are part of them, these groups are not under full control. And so they could turn against anyone at any moment. And there's a lot of people that can simply be bought off. So in the event that they go into Lebanon and there's these sectarian massacres and they're going to purge the land of the Shia, right? And they're going in with their sectarian slogans, things could really badly backfire for them. And of course, the Iraqis have pledged that they would come. The Syrians have now deployed their armed forces in a bunch of buses along the border with Iraq. There was some speculation that they were going to do an anti-ISIS campaign, which of course the United States would be backing, because the US always has to use the excuse of ISIS in order to stay in the region, just ignoring that the current ruler of Syria is a former commander of ISIS, and by Trump's own admission, a leader of Al-Qaeda. But that being said, there are other developments that are going on. So we're talking about Iraq in the region. There are other developments. The Saudis fear that Iraq, its PMU forces, Popular Mobilization Units, or the Hashid al-Sha'bi, will retaliate against them for their joint strikes. So the US and Saudi Arabia killed dozens across military sites and some civilian areas as well. There were civilians killed in the attacks across Iraq. And the Islamic resistance in Iraq, which are PMU groups, and then some other groups that came off that are sort of separate from that and emerged later, like Awliya ad-Dam, which means the guardians of the blood. That's what it translates to. They announced that they were giving a deadline to the Iraqi government to respond to Saudi Arabia. And of course, that deadline expires in about around 24 hours now, I think. So the Saudis are anticipating that there could be a joint attack between Iraq, the Iraqi forces, Yemeni forces, and Iran's IRGC, because there were Iranians killed in these Saudi-US strikes on PMU facilities inside of the country. So it is possible that the Iranians may launch some sort of attack. I don't think necessarily they even need to. It's possible they could. But the Saudis are spooked. And so they're deploying in Baghdad the Iraqi security forces. They're deploying in their jeeps to try and guard the green zone area where the US embassy is, because they're anticipating attacks coming from these factions. And these are serious factions. Now, the Iraqi government is under an enormous amount of pressure. Its prime minister has pledged that the PMU will be disarmed. How in the world he thinks he's going to do that, I have no clue. But that's the pressure that's being put on them. Because, of course, Iraq, when the United States overthrew their government and implanted a confessionalist system and allowed for massive corruption, allowed these sectarian death squads and Al-Qaeda to come into the country, managed these Al-Qaeda leaders and put them into certain camps, and it just so happened to be released and then lead all these groups, and then suddenly they have tens of thousands of fighters to form Daesh, and there's this massive insurgency, and it just all happens in such a coordinated way with a bunch of randoms that just so happen to be in like Kambuka and in US detention facilities, in a country that the United States controls and has economic sway over it, put its government in power, right? Set up its new system. It's a coincidence that ISIS popped out of nowhere with tens of thousands of fighters in these brand new vehicles, right? And perfect propaganda campaign to recruit people who were gullible enough to join them. So anyway, that aside, there are a number of different groups that most people are not aware of. So you have the Hashd al-Sha'bi, which are the groups that were created with the help of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran. So the former head of the Quds Force, which deals with like the axis of resistance fronts, Qasem Soleimani was very much involved in forming these groups. And these groups were created in order to combat ISIS on the ground. And so these were the ground forces that destroyed ISIS. They defeated ISIS on the ground, the PMU groups. And that's why they exist. So like the US now try and claim that these terrorist groups and they're aligned with Iran. It's like, well, this is all blowback from what you did. This is a result of you toppling the government in the country, installing a confessionalist system and a corrupt system. The corruption is just insane in Iraq. Everyone knows that. And then you have this ISIS campaign that comes, and the US acted as the Air Force combating ISIS. But there were a lot of question marks about them leaving certain convoys that could have been struck at different pivotal points, right? So, there are some question marks there around whether they actually wanted the problem to go away, because ultimately ISIS allowed the US to remain in the region. It gave them a justification to remain in the region, and it emerged just at the right time when they wanted to be in the region and have an excuse to be there, right? Just when they wanted the excuse, suddenly it emerges. Hey, draw your own conclusions. Perhaps we'll go into that more in another episode of the history of ISIS and Qaeda and these groups. We've touched on it a little bit in the past. But there's these groups, which I wanted to show, by the way, because there are groups like this. We'll just play a video that they released earlier this year this one is called Awliya ad-Dam. They were formed, I think they first popped up, I saw them pop up in about 2020, and they started launching attacks on US targets. But just so everyone's aware, they have tunnel systems, missiles, and drones, and they released videos like this. So that's Ayatollah Khamenei and Abdul Malik al-Houthi. This was the former spokesperson of Saraya al-Quds, Islamic Jihad, the Palestinian resistance group. That's Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the former Secretary General of Hezbollah. Qasem Soleimani. Sistani, like a religious leader. Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, who was one of the sort of foundational figures in the PMU. So as you see, they have, these sprawling tunnel systems, which they put on display before. They have rockets. They have, I believe, ballistic missiles as well that they've demonstrated before that they fired. They have cruise missiles and drones. So they have large arsenals And these are serious groups that operate throughout the country. This one, again, emerged later after those original PMU groups were created. And it's not even the most powerful of all of those groups. They were also operating FPV drones and hitting targets, US targets, during the 40-day war. Most people don't know about them, this specific group, but they are very much, aligned with the regional axis of resistance, and evidently they do have these underground facilities, these to store weapons. And there's other videos that were published from them where they're operating these drones, and obviously, sort of promotional videos for them, if you will. I have to give the disclaimer that we're not endorsing this by showing this. We are, that was Yahya Sinwar that was put on one of these drones, but this is not an endorsement. This is for educational purposes. This is why we're showing these videos and why we show all the content in these streams here. So these are some of the groups that do operate in Iraq. They're serious. They possess large arsenal, and we're looking at organizations that cannot be simply collapsed and disarmed overnight, especially when they're vowing not to, and they see it as a religious duty to resist. So there is a big threat that if these groups do decide to commit themselves to a war against Saudi Arabia, I think Saudi Arabia would try and back down from that. But if they do this retaliatory series of attacks, it could be very devastating for Saudi Arabia. If they continue to do attacks of this nature, of the nature that they choose to begin, then it can be very costly. And of course, they're a big card that Iran has to play in the region. Now, they've held their fire a number of times before, but they are there and they can operate alongside all of the other elements of Iran's regional axis in order to make the US and the Israelis suffer. And we haven't really seen them as well exhibit all of their power when it comes to their missile and drone capabilities that they could possibly use against the Israelis. They used to operate, by the way, when before the previous Syrian government fell. Some of these Iraqi forces used to be stationed here where the Israelis now occupy in southern Syria, right? Next to the Jolan here, Quneitra area. So these groups, these Iraqi groups, used to actually have a presence here in the south of Syria. But of course, the new situation is that Jolani's best friends in Tel Aviv, who he's signed what is it called? A cooperation mechanism. Anyway, it was announced by the United States, by the White House, put an official press briefing. It was where they said that they've developed a communication mechanism between Syria and the Zionist entity, and Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, who told his followers that he was going to liberate Jerusalem. They were going to Jerusalem. Perhaps we'll be going to Jerusalem for a very different reason than liberating Palestine. But he is, of course, in the pocket of the United States, controlled by the United States, so there won't be any resistance forces there. There are groups that have emerged and popped up in the south of Syria, as I've explained on previous streams, because Jolani doesn't actually truly control his country fully. There are groups that operate independently in the south, and it does appear as if they are growing in strength. To what extent they are armed and ready for a conflict with the Israelis, we really do not know. There are a lot of statements that have come out from these groups, and we're really not clear on how powerful they were. But I just like to note that the Iraqis used to be there. I think Yemen's Ansarallah wanted to come before the former Syrian government was overthrown, or it fell. The Yemen's Ansarallah really wanted to try and deploy along the Jolan, the Golan Heights, to perhaps do a ground offensive against the Israelis. But of course, like Jolani and his gang, they're focused on killing the Shia and going after all the minorities and making Syria Sunni. And all the forces that are aligned with him think this. Whereas Jolani's sitting there, playing basketball with CENTCOM, having a great time, kicking his feet up, acting like a celebrity, winning, just having the time of his damn life with all the corruption possible around him, all these militant groups, and bro's chilling for now, stressed out of his mind that he might get blown up by some of his former colleagues. But, he's having a good time, where all of his militant allies think that he's like on this whole, or cleanse the region and all of this. And he's like, yeah, where would the US, The funniest thing is, I'd have to pull it up actually for another episode, but there's like a video of him at like a basketball game, which is the funniest thing that you could ever see. But that being said, that aside for a moment, it does appear as if we are heading to a standoff. And the situation in Yemen is perhaps the most pressing issue right now. However, we are seeing things develop across the region. I'd just like to note that the United States is in a terrible position. I mean, having its standoff munitions, its long-range precision missiles so severely drained, having to move its forces and retreat from all these bases in the Persian Gulf, having Saudi Arabia under a blockade in the Red Sea, having the Strait of Hormuz locked down, the Iranians picking off, the leadership of the Kurdish Iranian opposition groups in northern Iraq, the Hashid al-Sha'bi threatening to attack Saudi Arabia in retaliation for these strikes as well. Like, everything the US does, every way it moves, is just, there is an answer for what they're doing. There is nothing the United States can gain from this. Nothing at all. The Israelis are happy, of course, because the Israelis always get away with whatever they want to get away with. That's just the name of the game here. Because the Trump administration is the weakest US government, I think, ever. I don't think there's ever been a US government that is so subservient to a foreign power. And that's what we're seeing here, because in the case of Gaza, we covered this briefly in the last stream, but in the case of Gaza, the so-called Board of Peace and Trump himself announced that there was an agreement that was struck between Hamas and this Board of Peace. It was a US-backed disarmament agreement. But Hamas wanted a phased disarmament agreement, along with the other factions in Gaza, because they're not just going to give up their weapons and allow Israel to come in and massacre everyone and do whatever they like. They're not going to retreat. They saw what happened in 1982 when the PLO retreated, when the PLO decided to abandon its positions and abandon resistance. When that happened in 1982, after Israel had killed about 20,000 Palestinians and Lebanese and had besieged Beirut, what happened? Well, some of the worst massacres in the history of this conflict occurred afterwards on September 16, and it went on for, I think, about 48 hours of nonstop killing. That the Kata'ib, or the Phalange, which are a fascist Christian militia ally of the Israelis, they're really a proxy for them in Lebanon. Also, they had alignment with other states as well. And these fascist militias went into the Sabra and Shatila refugee camp. And it was almost all women and children left there. And they're in the area. They're also Shia Muslims as well. So some Shia were killed in this. But the vast majority were women and children, Palestinian refugees, women and children. And they just massacred them, and the Israelis looked on and they watched the whole thing happen. They allowed them to come in. They allowed them to advance. They watched it happen. And that is what happens when you hand over your weapons. Around 3,000, up to 3,500 Palestinians were killed in about 48 hours. Palestinians and some Shia Lebanese as well. Actually met some families, Shia Lebanese families that lost family members in the midst of this massacre. And they were defenseless because all the men were gone. So they couldn't defend them. They couldn't do anything. That's what happens when you hand over your weapons. So Hamas and the other Palestinian factions in Gaza are not going to do that. They've already been subjected to a genocide. They know what Israel's about. The Israelis said, no, we're not going to agree to it, because they just have to throw over all of their weapons to us. And we're not going to withdraw from Gaza. And there will be no reconstruction until they hand over all of their weapons. And the Board of Peace, which is supposed to be run by the United States and the Trump administration, goes, we're sorry, Israel. We're sorry. We didn't mean it like that. Actually, we're going to do whatever you want. Please, I'll kiss your feet, right? They went and like that because the Board of Peace, which is, Trump's idea, is controlled by Trump. Well, where are Trump's masters at, right? Israel complains, and then they get their way, like CENTCOM with the Civil Military Coordination Center, which is based in Kiryat Gat, which monitors the ceasefire in Gaza, which all these countries that are part of this CMCC are all complicit. They watch every day as Israel mows down children. It shoots little kids in the head, and it bombs, funerals and all of the rest of it, like it's been doing in Gaza, and kills, heading on now for about 1,300 people since the ceasefire, the so-called ceasefire, occurred. And the CMCC, which is supposed to be headed by CENTCOM, oh, well, what happens when Israel goes over to CENTCOM and tells them, yeah, we want Spain out of the CMCC? CENTCOM goes, yes, master, I'll do anything. I'll kiss your feet. Out of the CMCC. We bow to you. That's what happens. So the Israelis, of course, control the CMCC. They have control over whatever the Board of Peace can't do what it wants. The so-called Board of Peace, ridiculous name for it. And when it comes to even the agreement struck with Lebanon, there were supposed to be these pilot zones. One of them is entirely in areas that are controlled by the Lebanese government. Israel hadn't entered them yet. The other portion of territory, this is in South Lebanon, pull up the area. The other, we're in Jordan. The other area here, where exactly is it? So in this region, the other area was partially in a zone already controlled by Lebanon, and Israel had not yet entered, but part of it was controlled by Israel. And the Israelis, kicked up a stink and decided that they weren't going to abide by it, and created a bunch of different excuses as to why they couldn't do that, and decided that they would strike Lebanese forces, right? And then try and blame it in one of those instances on Hezbollah and the Hezbollah IED. So the Israelis can't even abide by their own agreements that they sign, which even work in their favor. They just, every single time, they get whatever they want, because the Trump administration just does not give a damn. It does not it will not pressure them. It will not push them in a direction, even if it's actually technically good for Israel. The Israelis, they just operate pure violence. That's what they are. It's like if anyone knows the well-known Algerian revolutionary philosopher Frantz Fanon, who said something to the effect of that colonialism is violence in its purest form. Well, that's what this is. They're completely irrational. They're not a rational power at all, not whatsoever. They're completely irrational, the Israelis. And so even the United States stepping in to help Israel strategically, to force them to do something that in the long run will be good for them, can't do it. They can't do it. And now the United States is stuck in this war, and the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking. They're stuck in this war, failing to have achieved regime change, strengthening the position of Iran, putting Saudi Arabia in the meat grinder, and presenting the perfect opportunity for Yemen's Ansarallah to do an offensive that might be able to liberate their country. And the Israelis are still there, and in the Trump administration is incapable of even making them withdraw or respect the initial withdrawal line in Gaza, the initial yellow line. Israel pushes deeper. They get away with anything they want. And now look at even domestic politics. Trump, when Abdullah Sayed won the Democratic primary in Michigan, what happens? Trump goes out, he hates Jewish people, he hates the Jews, he hates Israel, he's anti-Israel, blah, blah. That's the only thing he has to say about him. Like, that's the most important thing that Trump thinks to say about him is Israel, 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 Israel. What about the United States? What about Michigan? And the media is the same way in the United States. Every time this guy comes on television, they're asking him about Israel. His stance is, yeah, let's not send money there. Let's oppose them. And they're just obsessed because there is no rational thought behind this. It's just pure violence, rage, supremacy. That's all they have. And then they have control over politicians like Donald Trump. Donald Trump is an idiot, a certified idiot. He has no idea what is going on. Hegseth, which we showed in the last stream, publicly said next to Trump and was celebrating how Trump kept Yemen out of the regional war. I mean, how are you the Secretary of War and you don't know Yemen is fighting and is a key player in the regional war? How do you not know this? It's ridiculous. These people don't have control over the administration. And it was a funny moment, which we also covered with Rubio talking about, oh, we're going against the ICC, so they can't arrest Americans in the future, and trying to make his argument, trying to make it seem like it was something to do with America. And Trump's like, they're not coming after me. He's doing it to protect Bibi. There's a pet peeve I have, people calling Benjamin Netanyahu Bibi, like the nickname that the Israelis gave him. I don't know why we're calling him that. The guy's like a butcher. Did we have like a nickname for other like murderous, genocidal war criminals that we were calling them nicknames? Let's stop that. That's something that, this is what I'm going to advocate. We stop calling him by that ridiculous nickname. Quite stupid. Anyway, that's my piece on that. Just so everyone is aware, we are looking for 300 new members to keep this news show alive. We do try to bring you everything in the way of what's going on with the regional resistance, what's happening on the war front, and giving you the analysis and breakdowns that you're just simply not going to get in the corporate media. And exploring all these topics. So if you want to continue to have shows like this, where we include that historical context, we bring you, this analysis of what is actually going on, the footage from the region that will not get airtime anywhere else, then please do consider joining our Patreon, or you can join us here on YouTube. Thank you to everybody who has joined, by the way. It, of course, helps us stay afloat. It's the reason why we are here and we can continue our journalism is because of you. We're 100% viewer funded, and we take pride in that. If you have made it this far in the episode, then please do hit the like button. Please do add a comment down below because it helps us in the algorithm. We are struggling with the algorithm as of late. And do hit that notification bell if you are already subscribed, if you're watching us on YouTube here. It does help, and we'll make sure that they can't sort of lock you out so that you don't see that the latest updates, the latest episodes are coming through. If you want the updates about what's going on in the region, they will be provided through our Mint Press Telegram and on our X account. We have those live updates of what's currently going on. We will continue to follow things as they develop and break down each issue as far in depth as we possibly can to bring you the latest. So if you have, of course, got this far, thank you for watching. today, and we will see you same place, same time, 4 p.m. CST on Monday, and we will be back with another episode. And it does seem like there will be quite a bit that there will be to cover then. So until next time, thank you to everyone for watching, and continue to stay updated through our social media until our